There's only one way to avoid criticism. Do nothing, say nothing, and be nothing. Aristotle. Here is the battle plan. We're going to cover airports, ATC, and airspace today. I'd like to start off with a discussion from last week regarding the sim ride that we did, and then we'll get into the ATC, airspace, and airports discussion. Do our quiz and assign some homework. If you have any questions, of course, feel free to ask. It's just the two of us right now, so ask away. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so here's our scenario. Let's talk about communications from Payne to Friday Harbor. Do you know what radio communications we're going to be doing from Payne? Can you start off, from the ground?
I'm not sure. Is it does that say 1, 2, 3? Oh, Painfield. 120.2.
Yeah, so it depends on the runway we're going to be using. But before we even start talking to the tower, or before we even start talking to ground, the first thing we're going to do is listen to the weather, or ATIS. And that is this frequency here, 128.65. So we're going to call up, or we're going to dial in 128.65 and listen to the hourly weather report at Payne Field. It's going to tell us something like information Bravo, winds, 125 at, whatever, wind direction, speed, gusts, temperature, sky conditions, that kind of stuff. At the end, it's going to repeat information Bravo. And that's, the letter you're going to tell ground that you have, so they know that you have the most up-to-date weather. Next, you're going to talk to ground on 121.8, if I'm not mistaken. And you get that from, the chart supplement or from your knee board. And you call up ground and you ask permission to taxi to the runway. Do you happen to remember how to make that radio call?
Nope.
No worries. So I think there are 5 parts to a radio call. You, me, where I am, what I want, and what I know. So that would be Payne ground. This is me, Cessna 2438 Echo. Where I am at the central ramp. What I want a taxi for a departure to the northwest with information Bravo. That's what I know. So Payne ground, Cessna 2438 Echo at the central ramp for a northwestbound departure with information Bravo. Again, that's that weather information. They will respond with instructions for how to get to the runway. I guess I don't have it up here. And they'll say something like Cessna 2438 Echo, taxi to runway 34 left via Charlie Juliet Alpha. And what they're saying there is you have been assigned a set of taxiways to get you to the runway safely. You're going to take taxiway Charlie and then Juliet and then Alpha to the runway. And then once you're at the runway, you do your run up where you make sure your engine is running correctly. And then there's an additional radio call before you leave a towered airport. Do you guys remember what that is? No worries. So we're going to say, we're going to request permission to depart, essentially. And we typically don't say the word takeoff until you have received a clearance to take off. You want to be very careful about what words you use on the radio so you don't say something and get confused. I think there was an airliner that said the word takeoff and then got onto the runway and collided with another aircraft that was landing, I think. So basically, always be careful of what you say, especially words like takeoff, landing, anything that's going to put you in a hazardous situation. So you're going to request a departure like this. Payne Tower, Cessna 2438 Echo, holding short, runway 34 left for a northwestbound departure. Again, that's, hey, you, tower, this is me. I'm here at the runway, and this is what I want. I want a northwestbound departure. They already know you have information Bravo, so you don't have to repeat that information. They will respond, Cessna 243 Echo, runway 34 left, clear for takeoff. They might also say, stand by, or hold short, or line up and wait. Basically, you have to pay attention to what they say and follow their instructions. Line up and wait is essentially get on the runway, but don't leave yet. There's something else going on. Then they say clear for takeoff, and you're good to go. And you always want to repeat clear for takeoff, or holding short, or whatever they tell you, you always want to repeat the instructions so they know that you know what you're doing. As we depart, let's say we turn off to the west, we're going to leave this airspace here. This is the Class Delta airspace. We're going to talk about airspace here today in a little bit. Once you're past their airspace, Payne Tower doesn't care about you anymore. They're going to say something like, Cessna 38 Echo, frequency change approved. Have a good day. And you'll say, Roger, frequency change approved. That means that I'm allowed to change my frequency and then go do whatever I want to do. Once we're out of the paying airspace, it's a good idea, not legally required, but it's a good idea to talk to flight following or to get flight following. That's essentially where you request air traffic control to keep an eye on you on their scopes and give you traffic information or assistance essentially. So that will sound like this. You'll find the radio frequency for, let's say, would-be approach. Again, you can find that on the chart supplement or, on your knee board or whatever. And you'll say something like, would-be approach, Cessna 2438 Echo over, I guess, South Camino maybe, for flight following to Friday Harbor. Something like that. Very similar to the radio call we did for ground, where it's you, this is me, this is where I am, this is what I want. Except now this time we don't have the what I know information. They don't have any weather information they're going to publish that you need to tell them about. So you'll say, would be approach, Cessna 243 Echo over South Camino for VFR flight following to Friday Harbor. They will respond a couple of different ways. They might say nothing at all, which means they're either really busy or they don't want to handle you or they don't want to help you out or for whatever reason they can't help you out. It could also just mean that they missed your radio call. You can try again, or you can just go about your business. They might also say something like aircraft, calling over South Camino, remain clear of the class Charlie. That's saying, hey, don't come into our airspace. We don't have the space for you. If they don't acknowledge your call sign, or if they say something like remain clear, that means stay away from here. And so you'll reply. You can reply, Roger, stay clear, or you can just go about do whatever you want. Obviously, don't go into their airspace if they tell you not to. And then they also might say something like, Cessna 2438 Echo, Squawk 4567, ident. That's saying, Roger, we will accept you into our airspace. Change your squawk, your transponder frequency, your transponder code to a discrete number so that I can keep track of you. And ident, that's saying like flash your transponder to let me know exactly where you are. Then they're going to find you on their radar and say Cessna 38 Echo radar contact over Saratoga, would be altimeter 2993. That's saying, all right, we've got you. I see you, and our current weather altimeter setting is this. And you can say, Roger, that checks for me, or like that's me, or a lot of people just say their call sign, 38 Echo, right? So that's flight following, and now we're good to go to enter the Charlie airspace here. And then we're going to talk about airspace today. As we're approaching another airport, ready to land or preparing to land, there are a couple of things we want to do. Do you guys remember those at all? I don't know if we've covered those, or if you were here for the last time we covered them.
Was it covered last week?
Not last week. We've covered it when we went through the last iteration of this program, and I wasn't sure if you guys were here for that.
I probably wasn't there.
Okay, no worries. Cool, we'll cover it today. All right, so as we're approaching a new airport, typically 10 miles out, we're going to pull up the weather again. So the weather is going to be different at every airport. So this time we're listening to the ASOS at Friday Harbor on 135.675. At this point, we haven't stopped talking to would-be approach, assuming that they allowed us into their airspace. So we're going to basically either wait for them to tell us to change frequency, or we're going to say, all right, we have the airport in sight. We're done. Thank you for helping us out. That'll be something like, would-be approach, Cessna 243 Echo, cancel flight following. That's saying, I'm done. I would like to stop talking to you now, essentially. And so they'll say, Roger, cancellation received, Squawk VFR, have a good day. That's saying, okay, I understand you can do your own thing now. Squawk VFR, that's the standard 1200 code for VFR aircraft. So you change your transponder code to that, and then you're good to go. You're on your own again. Now, 10 or I like to do it 15 miles out. I pull up the weather, listen to what the winds are doing, what's the temperature, the sky conditions, the visibility at Friday Harbor. And then at 10 miles, that's when you're going to start advising people here at this airport that you are coming in to land. Do you guys remember the difference between a magenta airport and a blue airport?
Is it non-towered?
Yes, which one's towered?
The blue one.
That's right. Blue is towered, magenta is non-towered. Awesome. So at Friday Harbor, we are responsible for advising people in the area what we're doing. We don't have to talk to the tower because there is none. We'll say something like Friday harbor traffic, Cessna 2438 Echo is 10 miles out to land runway 34, Friday harbor traffic. And the reason we bracket the airfield or the communication with the airfield name is because all of these airports, 128.25, 128.25, and where's Roche? 128.25. All of the airports on the islands here use the same radio frequencies. So anytime you're talking in this area, you're talking to everybody. So you want to let them know which airport you're talking about specifically, and you want to say it at the beginning and at the end of your radio call, in case somebody missed the first part of your radio call. So again, Friday harbor traffic, Cessna 38 Echo over Cattle Point to land runway 34, Friday harbor traffic. And then do you guys remember how we enter the pattern? Let's say here's the runway and we're doing, let's say we're landing 16 and it's left pattern. You guys remember where we enter?
We enter 45 degree from the downwind.
Downwind, that's right. 45-degree angle on the downwind leg. Perfect. So we're on the downwind. We make our radio calls, and we'll say something like, Friday harbor traffic, Cessna 3 Echo is on the left downwind for runway 16. And then here we're descending down to base. We'll make another radio call. Friday harbor traffic, Cessna 3 Echo is on left base for runway 16. And then finally, turning final. We're just going to say final, not left final, because you'll get made fun of. So you'll say Friday harbor traffic, Cessna 3 Echo on final for runway 16. And then once you've landed, you're going to get off the runway and advise Cessna 38 Echo is clear of runway 16. Boom. And that's kind of the basics of the radio calls between a towered airport through a Class Charlie airspace into a non-towered airport. Any questions?
Why are there left downwind and like right? Is there a right downwind?
Yeah, absolutely. So standard pattern is left turns. Let's say there's a city here. That's a little city, and they don't want you flying over the city. You can be, left pattern for 16. They might also have you do right pattern for 34. Right? Instead of flying over the city over here, they'll have you fly over the water at Friday.
Okay.
And that's the case actually. If you look, I drew over it, but here it says RP. So that's telling you right pattern for this runway. I can't really see it because I drew over it, but okay, there's that. Good question though. All right, any other questions before I change gears? No? Okay, cool. Let's discard that. Shifting gears. Okay, so last week, actually, I think I got somebody new here who showed up. Anthony and Fish. How's it going, guys?
Yeah, doing pretty well. I actually was kind of thinking there was no flight school today since you had a early announcement last time, so I was actually watching a couple of TCS videos.
Sorry, man. I was in another call right up until the start of it, so I apologize. I'll try to announce it later on, or in the future. But yeah, I was stuck on a call. Okay, so let me start up. So last week, Anthony actually challenged me to fly this pattern here at TNCS or whatever it is, and I was not happy with my performance. I gotta say, I was very upset that. Hang on a second. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna close my door here. Okay, back. All right, so I thought we could go through my performance flying this aircraft at I think it's the world's smallest airfield, and talk about what I could have done better, what you should do as a pilot before you depart an airfield like this, and then what we can do, to be better pilots in the future. First of all, before we even set foot in the cockpit, what are some things that you want to do to make sure you're going to have a safe flight?
Your pre-flight checks.
Yeah. Anything else?
Listening to the ATIS.
Yep. Okay, so I know it's kind of a vague, open-ended question. So first thing we're going to do, Northwest craft. Anytime we fly an aircraft, we want to have this checklist complete. N stands for NOTAMs, or notices to airmen. W stands for weather. K stands for known delays. R stands for runways. A stands for alternates. F stands for fuel, and T stands for takeoff and landing distance calculations. So, as a safe VFR pilot, one that uses the simulator as an appropriate tool and not just as a toy, I should have completed this checklist before we depart the field. So, first things first, let's go to the NOTAMs. Bam. So TNCS, it doesn't look like there are any NOTAMs in this airspace. Can you guys still see my screen?
Yep.
Great. Yeah, so there's no NOTAMs. Those are notices to airmen, or notices to air mission. That's going to be anything that might be dangerous in the area, or anything that might have changed from the charts. Next is W, weather. So we look at the weather. We get a proper weather brief from Northwest, or from 1-800-weatherbrief.com to make sure that we are not going to be flying in any adverse weather. Included in the weather brief is going to be our temperature and pressure settings and altimeter settings. So basically, what the airplane is going to be experiencing, or the density altitude, right? I calculated earlier, but basically, for this airfield, let's see, where did I put it? Right here. For this airfield, it's going to be, I think it was like 30 degrees Celsius. Yeah, I just changed 28 degrees Celsius for, somewhere nearby. It doesn't give you the weather for this place. But 30 degrees Celsius was what I noted earlier. So it's a pretty warm day. 15 degrees Celsius at sea level is the standard temperature. And then the altimeter setting, I couldn't find it. They must have some different thing here. But basically, we always want to check the pressure and temperature and calculate our density altitude. Do you guys remember what density altitude stands for, or what it means?
It's referring to the pressure of the air.
Yeah, close. So it's the pressure altitude corrected for non-standard temperature. It's essentially what the aircraft feels like it is flying at. So you take things like pressure, obviously, the temperature, the humidity, and you find a value for what the equivalent altitude is. So the hotter it gets, the higher the aircraft feels like it is flying at. The lower the pressure, again, the higher the altitude feels. And so we want to make sure that we're not going to be flying at a density altitude that's too great for our aircraft, right? And we can do that by doing our takeoff distance and landing distance calculations. We're going to get to that in a minute. So we get our good weather brief, right? That's Northwest craft, NOTAMs, weather, known delays. That's something you can check like the news for. Is there anything in the area that's going to make it difficult for me to get to the airport, or anything in the at the airport, or any traffic in the airspace, or anything that might adversely affect the flight. So that's the K, known ATC delays. R is our runway distance. So this airfield, what was it, 994 feet by 66 feet? That's a pretty short runway. I think Northway, the club that I fly with, the flight school that I fly with, has a minimum of like 3,000 feet for private pilots. So this would not be an acceptable airfield if you're flying with Northway. Let's see, runways, alternates. If you can't make it to your destination or the field that you plan to land on, what are your alternates? So like last week when I decided to go around, instead of forcing the landing, a safer decision would have been to go to St. Martin Grand Case, maybe Princess Juliana International, or St. Bartholomew, right? So alternates, you always have the option of going to your alternate rather than trying to force a landing. There's that. Fuel, your fuel required. You guys remember what the fuel requirements are VFR day? No worries. So in VFR world, you need 30 minutes. So you need to be able to get to your destination plus 30 minutes of fuel at your cruise speed to loiter. For nighttime flying, you need an additional 45 minutes of fuel. So you need to get to your destination plus 45 minutes of fuel. And so we would basically take our cruise chart here to find out how much fuel we need. So obviously for this flight, we're staying local, but let's say we're going to, to be flying for 2 hours. At 2,000 feet, we need 16.8 gallons to complete the flight, and then an additional 4.2 gallons for legal purposes. But let me ask you this: do you always go with the bare minimum legal requirements?
Of course not.
Yeah, absolutely not. And that's something they're going to ask you on your check ride. So what's the difference between personal minimums and legal minimums? And that's that. Basically, like, the legal minimums are what you are legally required to have on board, but my personal minimums are what I would take in addition to the legal minimums to make sure that I don't get myself killed. So there's that. And then, all right, so now we get to the takeoff and landing distance calculations. So let's say for 30 degrees at sea level, roughly, we're going to need at least 865 feet to depart this field. If there were a 50-foot obstacle at the end of the runway, we would need 1,545 feet. So what would we say our field was? 994. So yeah, we have an additional 200 feet of runway, maybe 150 feet of runway here. But is that within your personal minimums? And that's really a question, for yourself. I personally wouldn't depart from this field in the real world. But again, simulators, you can kind of get away with doing silly things because it's a fun game. But as I've mentioned earlier, the mindset I'm trying to embody is to treat the simulator as though you were actually flying the aircraft, and develop good habits rather than doing the wrong thing. So there's that. So that's our Northwest craft before we even get anywhere near the aircraft. Now, as we get into the aircraft, what are some other things that we want to have completed before we start even taxiing to the runway? Any thoughts? All right, no worries. So before we get to the runway, before we even get to starting the aircraft, we run through our our pre-flight checklist, and that includes a passenger safety brief. Do you guys remember what the safety brief includes?
The flight safety video.
Right, but we're in a Cessna, so we don't really have a safety video, unfortunately. At least I don't, and they don't come standard in the Cessna. So we use the acronym SAFETY. So S stands for seatbelts. So we advise the passengers seatbelts. Make sure to keep your seatbelts on at all times. What are they legally required to do? They are legally required to keep their seatbelts on during taxi, takeoff, and landing. I recommend you keep your seatbelt on throughout the flight, but you are allowed to take your seatbelt or unbuckle your seatbelt in the air if the pilot allows it, essentially. A stands for air or air condition, or basically how to use the air condition and environment equipment in the aircraft. F stands for fire, the fire extinguisher. Where is the fire extinguisher in the aircraft? E, where are the exits and what to do in the event of an emergency. So in the event of an emergency, I will fly the aircraft, you handle the radios, or I'll fly the aircraft, you handle the checklists, that kind of thing. What we do in the event of I call them non-scheduled stops. We, get out of the aircraft, move it at a 45-degree angle away from the propeller, and stay with the aircraft for rescue. And how to get out of the aircraft. How do the doors open? Can you kick out the windows if you need to? That kind of stuff. T, talking. We will maintain a sterile cockpit throughout the entire flight. That basically means anytime the aircraft is moving, nobody's talking about anything. The only person allowed to be talking is the pilot or the co-pilot, and they will be, making radio calls. The exception is I always like to bless my passengers and tell them, guess what? You're no longer a passenger. Now you are a crew member, and I would like you to scan your sector for any aircraft or any unsafe situations that might be happening. So if you see anything unsafe, call it out, let me know, and then we'll address it. But in general, talking, especially during taxi, takeoff, and landing sequence, no talking, sterile cockpit. And then Y is the last one, your questions. What are your questions regarding the flight? And you always want to end it with an open-ended what are your questions rather than do you have any questions? You want to give them the opportunity and have them feel relaxed and welcome to ask their questions. Because for a lot of people who have never flown a general aviation aircraft before, it might be a very scary and stressful situation. So be open, be welcoming, and invite their questions. Right? So, what are your questions? Nothing? Cool. All right, so let's take a look at my flight here. Again, not super happy with my performance, but I figured it might be a good idea to recap it and see what we could have done better. You guys ready? Awesome. All right, so I ran through this. Let's just bump it back here. All right, as we're departing, our short field technique, and that's laid out in our pilot operating handbook. We got flaps at 10 degrees, full throttle with brakes on, and then once the brakes once the tachometer is up, we release the brakes, and our rotate speed is 50 knots at in this aircraft. So at 50 knots, that's when we pull back on the stick or on the yoke, and then we climb at our VX or VY. Do you guys remember what VX and VY are?
Was VX 68 and VY 74?
Yeah, 65 and 79. But again, it depends on the aircraft. Each variant of the Cessna 172 might have a different VX, VY. But in general, what are VX and VY?
VX is best angle, VY is best rate.
Awesome. Yeah. And what do those mean?
VX is for getting over obstacles fast. VY is for getting high as fast as possible.
Yeah, over time. Perfect. Excellent. All right, so let's take a look. So we've done that. We're departing. I'm going to mute this so we're not talking over. All right, so airspeed's alive, 45. So here, this is when I would rotate, just barely getting off the runway. And here, 65 knots or 79 knots, depending on what we're climbing at. And yeah, we're getting up to 79 here. A little nose high. And the other thing I forgot to do, I forgot to do it again, is figuring out what direction the runway is. So let me go back up here. Yeah, it's a 300, it looks like. Yeah, so that's another thing you want to know is what runway you're departing on. All right, continuing on.
I also might add that in addition to recognizing your runway heading, you should also note both runway headings for traffic pattern purposes.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so I'm trying to get up to 79 knots, having a hard time. It looks like, what is the altitude that we want to turn crosswind at? Do you guys remember?
Was it 1,000 above field elevation?
Not quite. We turn crosswind at 700 feet above field elevation, and then we turn downwind at 1,000 feet above field elevation. And that's another thing I failed to note when I first started, last week when we flew this, is what was field elevation, right? So as you can see, rushing through the takeoff procedure can throw a wrench into what you're trying to do. So here I was rushing through everything and came up with a very sloppy pattern. Yeah, see, I'm at 560, turning crosswind. Again, don't even remember what heading I was supposed to be on, so not safe, not good practice here. Yeah, and I think I decided to level off at 1,000 feet because I, again, didn't know what the altitude of the airfield was. All right, on the downwind leg, do you guys remember what radio calls we're supposed to be making? We talked about it earlier, during our little scenario.
It was something like you declaring that you were flying a right-hand pattern, was it?
Yeah. Yeah, so whatever the name of the airfield is, I'm still not even sure. I would say airfield traffic, Cessna 38 Echo on the right downwind for runway 30, whatever the name of the airfield is. What is it? Juancho? I don't even know. Yeah, Juancho Eros Queen. Yeah, I don't even know, man. But yeah, so that would be my first radio call. Now, abeam the numbers. That's when we're going to reduce power to 1,500 RPMs, drop one notch of flaps, and begin our 500 foot per minute 500 foot per minute rate of descent. Turn right base at 700 feet above the ground, roughly. Again, without knowing where or what the altitude of the field was, this pattern is one of my sloppiest in a long time. And then we want to be pitching for 85 knots on the downwind leg. Then we make our right turn to crosswind, make that radio call, Huanchin traffic, Cessna 38 Echo turning right crosswind for runway 30, Huanchin traffic. And we always want to bracket it, again, because you might be talking to multiple airports at a time. Another notch of flaps. So here we should be at about 20 degrees of flaps, pitching for 75 and continuing our rate of descent. And then turning final, we make that radio call. We don't say right final. We say Huanchin traffic, Cessna 38 Echo turning final, runway 30, Huanchin traffic. And then we'd be, pitching for 65, depending on what the winds and the conditions are, 30 degrees of flaps. And then, our short field technique tells us that we should be shooting for an aiming point about 200 feet before the runway starts. And you can see my short field technique isn't on point today or last week. And so we decide to go around. And we'll just advance it here, going around. Yeah. Here we get over the runway and I'm not happy with it. I know I'm not going to be able to stop in time. So decide, 38 Echo going around. It's always better to go around than try to force the landing. And here's the thing. When we're flying the simulator, this is what we're going to develop our habits. So we don't want to push a landing that is going to be unsafe. And we want to treat it as though we're flying a real aircraft. So going around, execute the go around rather than trying to force it. And that's another thing I'm not super happy with myself. Last week, I did end up trying to force it. And we'll just advance it and you guys can see this horrible landing here. Right about here. Same deal, traffic pattern, everything. But right there. Yeah, I'm at 60 knots over the numbers, 55. Still too fast, and I drift over to the right, set it down, and try to force it down. Flaps up, full brakes. That's another thing. Applying full brakes can end up popping your tires, so you want to be very careful about that. And we go over the runway and over the cliff and kill ourselves. Not a good example at all, especially using the simulator as a training tool. So I apologize for my poor decisions and my poor example last week. You guys have any questions?
We could actually try to land a 747 on the airport because some folks have actually done it.
Okay. The point I'm making, though, is the point of the simulator is to develop good habits, right? And we're trying to become actual, VFR pilots here. And I don't want to encourage, making inappropriate decisions in the simulator. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. And there's that. All right. Any questions before we get into collision avoidance and some airfield stuff or some airspace stuff? Sweet. So as VFR pilots, it's our responsibility to avoid other aircraft. ATC is going to give us some help, but it is up to us to make good decisions and not die. So one of the things that we can use are navigation lights, rotating beacons, and strobes. We have the landing lights usually on the nose or on the wing here, pointing forward, taxi lights as well. These are, and we also have our rotating beacon on the tail, and then our strobe lights that flash to let other aircraft know, we're in the area. We typically don't want to turn on our strobe lights until we've been cleared to depart, or if we're flying at night, especially don't want to have them on the airfield where you might blind another pilot and ruin their night vision. We also have our navigation lights. A lot of aircraft these days have their ADS-B linked to their navigation lights. I like to fly with them all the time because it's just added visibility. On your left wing, you're going to have a red light. On the right wing, you're going to have a green light. And on the tail, you're going to have a white light. So keep in mind, these lights are standard. So when you go to the exam, they're going to ask you, what if you see a red flashing light and a red steady light? Well, that tells me that I'm over here looking at this aircraft because I see a red light and a red flashing light, and the aircraft is passing from my right to my left. If they say something like, you see a green light and a red flashing light, then I'm over here. and I'm seeing the aircraft pass from my left to my right. Right? That makes sense? And they might ask you something like, if I see only a white light and a rotating, a flashing red light and a steady white light, then I'm, back here looking at the aircraft. If they say you see red and green and a white light and a rotating beacon, then it's coming at you, right? So that's generally how they're going to ask you the question. In the daytime, we want to scan using regularly spaced eye movements to clear the area. Again, it's up to you to scan the sky. You want to spend most of your time looking up and outside of the aircraft rather than looking down at your instruments. You can worry about really focusing on instrument flying when you get to your instrument rating. At night, it's a little different. We want to use off-center viewing and scan with our peripheral vision because the rods in our eyes are what take over at night. So rods, I like to remember rods and rangers, right? I used to be a ranger, so rangers, we operate at night, so we use rods at night. If you don't see any relative motion between you and a little airplane speck, that means you're very likely on a collision course, and you can either turn right or left. Typically, we want to, give way to the right. So another thing we can use to avoid other aircraft is to perform a clearing turn. This is part of your maneuver checklist. Anytime you're going to do any sort of maneuver, steep turns, chandelles, lazy eights, the very first thing your DPE is going to want to see is a set of clearing turns. So as we're flying, we're going to make a turn to the right, turn to the left, back to our heading, and clear the airspace. You can also do a 360-degree turn and perform your clearing turn that way. Always do clearing turns before you do any maneuvers, because not only is it the safe way to operate, your DPE will be very happy to see you doing the right thing. That's the designated pilot examiner. You also want to have your landing lights on below 10,000 feet. That's what the airliners do, and it's a very good idea to keep your lights on. And then ADSB, that's the Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast. That's a system that helps radar kind of supplement with your position and altitude and stuff. We'll talk about that here in a minute. So let's recap. What color is on the right wing?
Green.
Green.
That's right, green. How about the left wing?
Red.
Too easy. Guys got it. What are some good practices for collision avoidance, just in general?
Clearing turns, looking outside.
Yep, clearing turns. Also your lights and ADSB. Nice. So we talked about this a little earlier when we talked about our Pain to Friday Harbor radio discussion. But ATIS stands for the Automatic Terminal Information Service. This is essentially the weather. They update it every hour, and occasionally they'll update it when something changes. And it's pretty standard. So once you've heard it a couple of times, you'll get used to it. Remember that they give you a letter to give to ATC. So A is Alpha, B is Bravo, C is Charlie. We use the phonetic alphabet. Once we have the weather, we'll switch over to ground and request permission to depart. Remember the 5 parts to a radio call: you, this is me, this is where I am, this is what I want, and this is what I know. They'll give you a clearance to taxi, and anytime they say hold short, you have to repeat that and actually hold short at the designated point. All right, moving on to the Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast. This is essentially a system that helps increase your situational awareness. It's a little transponder that sends information to the ATC without them having to interrogate, or there's no interrogation required, right? So it tells them, hey, this is Cessna 2438 Echo. We're at 3,000 feet, and this is what we're doing. Make sense? It's really cool. A lot of people were kind of not super stoked about it. I'm actually, I love it. I have an ADSB in receiver in my aircraft, and it pairs with my iPad, and it lets me see other aircraft in the airspace, kind of like I have my own little mini radar on my kneeboard. So I'm totally for ADSB. It is required in Class A, B, and C airspace. We'll talk about that, what those are here in a minute. Class Echo airspace at or above 10,000, excluding at or below 2,500. Within the mode C veil, again, we haven't talked about these yet. Above and within Class Bravo or Charlie, up to 10,000, and in Class like Echo airspace over the Gulf of Mexico, at and above 3,000, within 12 miles of the coast. So let's review. What is ATIS?
Weather information?
Exactly, it's the weather, the Automatic Terminal Information Service. What function does ground perform?
Tell you how and when to taxi.
Yeah, they own the taxiways and they tell you how to get there. And in your own words, explain ADSB.
A way for anyone with a transmitter to see where aircraft are going.
Yeah, kind of. It's essentially a transponder that sends information to ATC to supplement radar information. But yeah,
Yeah, there we go.
if you have the in receiver, like the receiver to take in information from ADSB, then you also have the ability to see other airplanes. Sweet. Let's talk about airspace. Class A for altitude starts at 18,000 feet and goes up to flight level 600. It is everywhere, and you are required to be on an IFR flight plan to be in Class A airspace. This also includes the airspace overlying the waters within 12 nautical miles of the coast of the 48 contiguous states in Alaska. And IFR, remember, IFR.
What's FL 600 or 600?
Flight level 600. So I forgot to mention, at 18,000 feet, so let me back up. When we're flying at an airport, and we talked about this before, we're going to receive an altimeter setting because the airspace that you're in might be a different pressure setting, let's say 29.90 and 29.95. The pressure here is greater than over here. So we want to make sure that we are flying at the appropriate altimeter setting so that our altimeter tells us the correct altitude. Once you get up to 18,000 feet, everyone's going to be flying at the same pressure setting of 29.92 inches of mercury. So it doesn't matter what Payne's ATIS is and Oregon and California. Everybody at 18,000 and above is going to be at 29.92. So we call those flight levels.
Oh, okay.
Class Bravo, Boeing or busy, is depicted by these solid blue lines, these guys here, right? And they surround the busiest airports in the country, like SeaTac. It goes from the surface up to 10,000 feet, and they are stacked like this, like an inverted wedding cake. So at the surface, and then there's an outer shelf. So here at the surface, see 10,000 SFC. That's saying this section of it is at the surface. Over here, it starts at 3,000 and goes up to 10,000. So that's this section here, 3,000 all the way up to 10,000. And then this section here would be this one, 5,000 to 10,000. So this one starts at 5,000. So it's kind of like an inverted wedding cake. And the Class Bravo airspace is tailored to each individual airport that it surrounds. You do need ATC clearance to enter. So let's say you're over here and you're flying towards, Ellensburg. If you wanted to go up to, let's say, 8,000 feet, you would need to hear Cessna 243 Echo. You are cleared to enter the Bravo. If you don't hear that phrase, then you're not allowed to enter their airspace. You can fly below it, but you can't fly through it. So you can, chill out over here. Clear to enter. And then there's the Mode C Veil. That's this guy here. And I think nowadays they actually include the ADSB part. So I need to update this picture. So Mode C and ADSB, that's saying you need a transponder within 30 miles of this airfield. So what are some differences between Class Alpha and Class Bravo airspace?
Class Bravo maybe is a little tastier than Alpha.
Yeah, I like that. Did you say tastier?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. All right. Can you be on a VFR flight plan in Class Bravo airspace?
I think we didn't mention that. I know you can't fly in Class Alpha, but for Bravo you would just need ATC clearance, right?
Exactly. Yeah, you can be you don't even need to be on a VFR flight plan to enter the Bravo. You just need to have approval from ATC. Class A, like you said, does need an IFR flight plan. Let's see what else. What color is the Class A airspace?
Blue.
Nope, Class B is blue. Class A actually doesn't have a corresponding color because if you remember, it is everywhere. It is over the entire country. Everything here is Class A above 18,000 feet.
Well, actually, you could say Class A is blue, since up there the sky is going to always be blue.
I like that. That's a good, yeah, very nice. Yeah, hadn't thought about that. Solid. All right, cool. Moving on. All right, Class Charlie airspace is a step down from Class Bravo in terms of how busy it is. It's still pretty busy. This one over here is over Whidbey Island. It is depicted by solid magenta lines, like these guys, and it goes from the surface up to 4,000 feet. So just like Class Bravo, it's going to have a center and it's going to have a shelf. So from the surface to 4,000, and then the shelf will be, in this case, 1,300 to 4,000. It has a 10 nautical mile radius, and you do need a transponder to go in there. So the difference between Bravo and Charlie in terms of radio communications, in Class Bravo, you need to hear Cessna 38 Echo, you are cleared to enter the Bravo. In Class Charlie, all they have to do is acknowledge your call sign. If they say Cessna 2438 Echo and anything else, they are acknowledging your call sign and you are therefore allowed into the Class Charlie airspace. If, however, they say something like aircraft calling over South Camino, remain clear of the airspace, that's saying, I do not acknowledge your call sign. Stay out of here. Right? So that's the difference. So what are some differences between Class Bravo and Class Charlie airspace?
Class Charlie has less strict ATC clearance requirements.
Yeah, exactly. Anything else? What other differences are there?
The magenta color.
That's right, magenta versus blue. And I think that's pretty much it. Okay, Class Delta. This is where I like to call home, Painfield. Class Delta is depicted by these blue dashed circles or dashed lines surrounding Painfield. Don't get it confused with this blue ring here. This has to do with the VOR, or the Very High Frequency Omnidirectional Range Navigational System. So not this ring, the dashed ring here. That's the Class Delta airspace. It goes up to 2,500 feet above the airport. So here, 3,100 is what we're looking at. And that's because this airfield is 608 feet above sea level. So 600 plus 2,500 is 3,100. So that's how high in sea level this airspace goes. So if we were to look at it from the side, if this is Painfield here, and there's my plane, that's me. It goes from the surface up to 3,100, and then the Bravo airspace starts at 6,000, and it goes up to 7,000. And there's a shelf that goes down to 5,000, kind of halfway there. Right? So this is Bravo, this is Delta. And there's some airspace in here that is neither. And we'll talk about that in a bit. Just like Class Charlie, we need two-way radio communications, not a clearance, just establish radio communications. So if they say your call sign, you're good to go. All right, let's recap Alpha through Delta. Class A, where does it start?
18,000 to flight level 600.
Perfect. What color is Class Bravo?
Blue.
All right. Do you need an ATC clearance to enter Charlie?
No, you just need acknowledge.
Yeah, your call sign acknowledged. Cool. And then Class Delta, how is it depicted?
Blue dash circle.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect. Let's move on to Class Echo airspace. This is airspace not classified as the others, A, B, C, or D airspace. This one gets a little complicated. There are several ways that Class Echo is depicted, starting with here at the surface, this dashed magenta ring or dashed magenta lines tell us that this airfield, Bremerton, doesn't have a tower, correction. This airfield here is Class Delta, or correction, Class Echo, up until the next airspace. So Echo all from the surface all the way up to 6,000 in this section here. So at 6,000, it becomes Class Bravo airspace. Over here, outside of the Bravo, it goes Echo all the way up to Class Alpha airspace at 18,000. That's inside this ring. On the outside of these magenta vignettes, these guys, it starts at 1200 echo airspace. On the inside, it starts at 700 feet AGL. So it's echo at 700 feet. So if you're at this, or not there, if you're at this city here, let's say this tower here, like that, it's going to be echo at 700 feet and above. If you're inside this magenta circle, then it starts at the surface. So surface, 700 feet, 1200 feet. If for whatever reason you can't find any of these pictures or these depictions, then it starts at 14,500 feet MSL. It's very rare. I think I've only found like one or two places where you actually find echo at 14,500. But if I'm not mistaken, it's a blue magenta, or correction, a blue vignette. I'll see if I have if I can get a picture or a demonstration, or not demonstration. Yeah, I guess a picture of a class echo at 14,500. So again, surface 700, 1200. I've only seen like one or two places where it's at 14,500. Now, Class G, Class Golf, is our only uncontrolled airspace, and that is anything that isn't alpha through echo, and it starts at the surface. So if we were to look here at the surface of, let's say, this river, it's Class Golf up until 1,200 feet. Then it becomes Class Echo, and it goes all the way to Class Alpha at 18,000. Right? By the way, after flight level 600, it becomes Echo again. So there's an Echo and Alpha sandwich. Echo, Alpha, Echo, and there's an E. So that's there. On the inside here, it starts at the surface. It's Golf until 700 feet, and then it's Echo again, all the way to Alpha. Underneath this shelf here, it goes, let's see, 1300. So it goes Golf until 700 feet AGL, and then at 1300 feet MSL, it becomes Class Charlie, and then it becomes Echo again at 4,000 feet. And that's this little fraction there. So Golf is basically at the surface up until it hits something else. And that's uncontrolled airspace. So you're going to find drones, UAVs, that kind of stuff in Class Golf airspace. So let's recap. Inside this vignette, where does Class Echo start?
700 feet.
700 feet, too easy. How about outside the vignette?
1,200.
1,200. And inside the dashed magenta?
1,400.
Actually, it starts at the surface here.
All right.
Yeah, no worries. Let's talk about the weather minimums in each airspace. Class A airspace, if you guys recall, you must be on an IFR flight plan. So you have no VFR weather requirements because you have to be IFR. Class Bravo, you need 3 miles of visibility. That means you need to be able to see, let's say if you're flying, you need to be able to see out to 3 statute miles. And you must remain clear of clouds. So you can get as close to clouds as you want. You just have to not be inside them for VFR in Class Bravo. Class Charlie and pretty much everything else, I use 3 152 or 3 Cessna 152s. 3 miles of visibility. That means you need to be able to see 3 miles. You need to be 1,000 feet above the clouds, 500 feet below, and 2,000 feet horizontally separated from the clouds. So that's for Class Charlie and for Class Delta and for Class Echo, less than 10,000 feet. At or above 10,000, we need to have 5 111. I have a pair of 511 pants, and that's how I remember it. 5 111. So 5 miles visibility, 1,000 above, 1,000 below, and 1 mile of horizontal separation. So that's 1 mile. Actually, I don't know if it's 1 statute mile. Going into Class Golf, let's get crazy here. Day is 1 mile clear of clouds. You need to have 1 mile of visibility when you're departing Class Golf airspace, and all you have to do is stay out of the clouds. That to me is a little ridiculous. I'm an instrument rated pilot, and that still seems crazy to me that you can fly VFR with 1 mile of visibility as long as you stay out of the clouds. But again, that's the legal minimum. It's up to you to develop your own personal minimums. At night, we go back to that 3152, 3 miles visibility, 1,000 above, 500 below, and 2,000 feet horizontal separation. In the day, more than 1,200 feet, but less than 10,000, you need to have 152, 1 mile of visibility, mind-blowing to me, 1,000 above, 500 below, 2,000 horizontal, night 3152. And then above 10,000 again is 5111. Remember pants, 511 pants. 5 mile visibility, 1,000, 1,000, and 1 mile of horizontal. So, yeah, at or above 10,000 is always 5111. Okay, so I know the weather minimums are a little hairy. My recommendation is to create flashcards to remember those. I also have a YouTube deck of flashcards. Basically, it's just a PowerPoint presentation that acts like a set of flashcards. You can use that if you want. They can be a little annoying to remember, but they're not that bad. Moving on to transponders and the codes. So there's mode A, which transmits your 4-digit squawk code to ATC. That's that 1200 for VFR pilots, or 4567 for whatever discrete code they tell you to squawk. That's that mode A part. The mode C transmits our altitude and the 4-digit squawk code, and we have to make sure that it's set to alt, which is sending them the altitude setting, or the altitude of the aircraft. Funny story. I heard there was an off-duty police officer, who had a weapon on him, who was, kind of a new pilot, and ATC told him to squawk alt or squawk altitude, and he took it to put in what altitude he was flying at, and he put in 7500. And 7500, if anybody wants to chime in, what is 7500?
The code for hijacking.
That's right. 7500 is hijacking. So he plugged in what they wanted was his altitude, 7,500 feet. In fact, he was telling him, hey, my aircraft's been hijacked. And so, of course, the ATC dude is trying to be calm and cool and collect. And he's like, okay, 3 Echo, are there any weapons on board? And as a police officer, he's like, yes, there is a weapon on board. And they're like, okay, Roger, clear to land on any runway. So he lands the plane and he comes to a stop, and then he gets swarmed by a bunch of police and, emergency vehicles and everything. And of course they got it all sorted, but it's just a funny little story. So when they say squawk altitude, it means turn your transponder to alt. Then mode S, this is designed to help ATC in busy areas and allow automatic collision avoidance. That's the ADSB thing. So it tells them your call sign, and also supplements their radar information. So there's that. Military mode C corresponds to our civilian mode A and C. VFR standard is 1200. Only ident when ATC requests, and don't squawk these unless you want to fly over the squadron of F-16s. Or land on any runway you want, or land anywhere you want. So 7.5, taken alive. 7.6, radios nixed. 7.7, going to heaven. Right? So 7.5 is hijack, lost comms, general emergency. The only one I've actually had to squawk for myself was 7600. We lost our radios in 152, in our 152, and we got a green light gun signal. Too easy. And then 7777 is the military interceptor code. Don't squawk that either. Basically, avoid the sevens. What time is it? Man, we're running out of time. How much time we got? Or how much more do we have? Let's see. Shoot. We might have to call it there. Do you guys have any questions before we call it a day?
Yeah. How much of the weather minimum stuff is going to be on the FAA exam?
Great question. So this is how they're going to ask it, and it will be, I promise. They're going to ask you something like, where are we? Let's go with Bremerton. They're going to ask something like, what are the weather requirements at Bremerton, right? And so in that question, they're testing your knowledge of airspace and weather minimums. They might ask you something like, what is the weather requirement over Bremerton at 8,000 feet, right? Now they're testing whether you know what the airspace is at a certain altitude, given several different types of airspace. So here, if you're to the east of, whatever, you're going to be in the class Bravo at that altitude. So you would need 3 miles visibility and just remain clear of the clouds. But if you're to the west of the blue line, then you're in class Echo airspace. And, depending on what altitude, it will have different requirements. So that's how they're going to ask it. Another thing that might come into play, something to keep in mind, let's see. You go back up to Friday. Yeah. They might say something like, oh shoot, I did the wrong thing. They might say something really mean like, over Friday Harbor Whiskey 3-3, what are the weather minimums or whatever. And if you notice, there are 2 Friday Harbors. Whiskey 3-3 is a seaplane base. FHR is a land or a regular paved runway. So be careful when they give you an airport on the test. Be sure to double check the 3-digit code to make sure you're referring to the correct Friday Harbor. Good question. Any other questions? You guys have any feedback from me? I know I go kind of fast. I get excited about airplanes, so. Was it okay?
Yeah, that's fine. I just need to think about the weather minimums and the airspace classes.
Cool. Yeah, I'll throw in. I'll put it in the Discord chat. A couple of resources for studying. If you have any questions, of course, feel free to shoot me a message on Discord, and I can help you off. I can help you out offline.
All right.
Cool. Sweet. Well, thanks for joining me, guys. I appreciate it. I always feel honored to share my knowledge with you guys. It's seriously, thank you so much.
For sharing.
Yeah. All right. See you guys later.
Yeah, see ya.